8.5 months hidden in a cave. They searched every day. They never found him. This is how he survived. And the Italian family who risked execution to keep him alive. A 23-year-old American pilot. A cave behind a waterfall in Tuscany. German soldiers searching the woods daily. And an Italian farmer named Tullio Maiorelli, who made a split-second decision that would echo through 80 years of history. This is the story of Lieutenant John R. Lyon and Second Lieutenant Herbert Downing, Jr., two P-38 Lightning pilots who collided mid-air over Italy on October 21, 1943. The farmer and his two children who smuggled food through enemy territory for 8 months. And the incredible reunion that happened just last year, October 2024, when the families finally met at the cave where it all began. In the next 30 minutes, you're going to hear about the mid-air collision that brought these pilots down behind enemy lines, the 8-month concealment that defied every odd, and the detective work by an Italian aviation archaeology team that brought this forgotten story back to light. You'll learn about the thousands of Italian civilians who risked everything to hide Allied soldiers, the ingenious ways they kept them alive under the noses of German commanders, and the legacy that's still being honored today in the hills of Tuscany. If you want to hear stories of courage that never made the history books, hit that like button right now. These are the stories that matter. Let me set the scene. October 21, 1943, central Italy. The Allied invasion of the mainland had started just 6 weeks earlier. American, British, and Canadian forces were grinding their way up the Italian peninsula, fighting for every mile. The Germans had responded by occupying everything north of Naples, and between the front lines and Rome, the skies were a battlefield. That morning, 72 B-26 Marauder medium bombers took off from bases in Sardinia. Their mission? Bomb the rail yards and bridges that the Germans were using to move troops and supplies south. These weren't strategic targets deep in enemy territory. These were tactical strikes, trying to slow down the German reinforcements pouring toward the Allied advance. Escorting those bombers were P-38 Lightning fighters from the 71st Fighter Squadron, twin-engine, twin-boom aircraft that the Germans called Der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. These planes could fly over 400 miles per hour, had a range of over 1,000 miles, and packed 4 50-caliber machine guns plus a 20-millimeter cannon in the nose. Concentrated firepower. No convergence problems like wing-mounted guns. Point and shoot. Among those P-38 pilots were First Lieutenant John R. Lyon and Second Lieutenant Herbert Downing, Jr., both flying out of Mature Airfield in Tunisia, both about to have the worst day of their lives. The bomber formation was approaching the target area near the Tuscany-Lazio border when German fighters hit them. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s came screaming in. The P-38s broke formation to engage, turning the sky into a chaotic dogfight at 300 miles per hour. And then, in the middle of that fight, while both pilots were taking evasive action and trying to line up shots, Lyon and Downing's aircraft collided mid-air. 2 P-38 Lightnings, both damaged, both going down. Imagine that moment. You're in a dogfight, adrenaline maxed out. Enemy tracers streaking past your canopy. You're pulling Gs, trying to get your nose on target, and suddenly, impact. Metal tearing. Controls going dead. Your aircraft starts to spin, and you have seconds to get out. Both pilots bailed out. Parachutes deployed, and they descended into enemy territory, watching their aircraft spiral into the Italian countryside below. 3 P-38s were lost that day. One pilot, F.O. Spaulding, went down along the coast. Lyon and Downing came down near a small town called Pitigliano, perched on volcanic rock cliffs in the province of Grosseto. Population maybe 3,000, built into tufa stone, and at that moment, in October 1943, occupied by German forces. When your parachute lands you in occupied territory, your survival depends on split-second decisions by people you've never met, people who have to decide, in that instant, whether to hide you or turn you in, whether to risk their lives and their families' lives for a stranger who was bombing their country just months ago. That decision was about to be made by a farmer named Tullio Maiorelli. Before we go further, drop a comment if you've ever heard a World War II story that didn't make it into the textbooks. These hidden histories are everywhere, and I want to know what you've discovered. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what was happening across Italy in the fall of 1943. Because Tullio Maiorelli's decision to hide those pilots wasn't unique. It was part of a wave of civilian courage that swept across the country. September 8, 1943. The Italian government announced an armistice with the Allies. After fighting alongside Germany for 3 years, Italy switched sides, and that created chaos. At that moment, there were approximately 80,000 Allied prisoners of war being held in Italian camps. About 1,300 of those were Americans, most of them captured in North Africa or shot down over the Mediterranean. When the armistice was announced, many camp guards just left, walked away. Some camps in remote areas didn't even hear about the armistice for up to 2 weeks. The Germans saw this coming. They launched Operation AXE, Operation Axe. Within days, German forces occupied northern and central Italy, tried to round up all the Allied POWs, and disarmed Italian soldiers by the tens of thousands. Any Italian soldier who didn't surrender was treated as a partisan. Any Italian civilian who helped Allied personnel faced execution. And here's what's remarkable. Thousands of Italian civilians helped anyway. Over 4,000 escaped Allied soldiers and airmen were hidden and guided to safety by a network run by Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty in Rome. This Irish priest created an elaborate system of safe houses, false documents, and guides that operated right under the noses of the Gestapo. A man named Giuseppe Baciagalupi ran an operation near the Swiss border that helped hundreds cross to safety through mountain passes. And all across Italy, in cities, in villages, on farms, individual families made the decision to hide Allied personnel in their attics, their cellars, their barns. The numbers are staggering. Thousands of Italian civilians participated in this hidden resistance. They weren't organized into formal networks like the escape lines in France and Belgium. Most of them were acting independently, family by family, making individual choices based on conscience rather than orders from above. The risks were enormous. In Western Europe, where similar escape lines operated, about 12,000 people helped Allied evaders. Nearly 500 of them were captured and executed or died in concentration camps. Think about that ratio. 1 in 24 helpers paid with their lives. In Italy, the risks were even higher because the Germans were facing partisan warfare and responding with brutal reprisals. In June 1944, German forces massacred 560 civilians in the village of Civitella della Chiana in Tuscany, revenge for partisan activity. In August, they killed 560 civilians in Sant'Anna di Stazzema, including women and children. The message was clear. Help the Allies and your entire village pays. So when Tullio Maiorelli encountered 2 American pilots near his farmhouse outside Pitigliano, he knew exactly what helping them would mean. He'd heard about the reprisals, he knew about the executions, he understood that the Germans showed no mercy to civilian resistors. Let me tell you about Pitigliano. It's built on cliffs of tufa, volcanic rock that's soft enough to carve but strong enough to build on. For centuries, residents carved cellars, tunnels, and storage rooms into this rock. The entire town is riddled with underground spaces. The town is nicknamed Little Jerusalem because of its historic Jewish community that thrived here for generations. And here's the thing. In 1943 and 44, when the Nazis occupied the area, the people of Pitigliano created a network to hide Jewish families in those same cellars and farmhouses. 22 Jews from Pitigliano would eventually die in concentration camps. But many more were saved by neighbors who hid them in plain sight, sharing food when everyone was hungry, taking risks when discovery meant death. In 2002, Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Institute in Jerusalem, honored several Pitigliano families as righteous among the nations for saving Jewish lives. This recognition is among the highest honors Israel bestows on non-Jews. This wasn't a town that turned away people in danger. This was a community with a tradition of resistance. Meirelli's farmhouse was next to a building called La Cantinaccia in the countryside outside town. Only dirt tracks for roads. Remote, but not remote enough. There was a German command post nearby. German officers could show up at any time, requisitioning supplies, searching buildings, asserting control. Meirelli had 2 children, Silvio and Silvana. He had a farm to run. He had every reason to turn those pilots away, to point them toward the hills and wish them luck and protect his family. He didn't. And here's what makes his decision even more remarkable. He didn't just hide them temporarily until they could move on. He committed to keeping them alive for as long as it took. That's not a one-day decision. That's signing up for an open-ended risk with no idea when or if it would end. He took them to a cave. Now, if you're finding this story as incredible as I am, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because I'm digging into more stories like this. Ordinary people in impossible situations making extraordinary choices. You don't want to miss what's coming next. The cave was hidden beneath a waterfall in a wooded area near a stream. The waterfall itself was the genius of the hiding place. The sound of falling water masked any noise the pilots made. The spray created a curtain that hid the entrance, and the location was remote enough that German patrols wouldn't stumble across it by accident. The entrance was carved into tufa rock by centuries of water erosion. You had to know it was there to find it. From a distance, it just looked like an overgrown hillside near the stream. The waterfall obscured the opening so completely that you could walk past it 20 feet away and never notice. Meirelli told the pilots to stay hidden. He would bring food. He would keep them informed about German movements. And they needed to be patient, because the Allied front was still miles and miles to the south, grinding slowly up the peninsula, and the Germans weren't going anywhere soon. Lieutenant Lyon and Lieutenant Downing settled into that cave, and then they waited. Think about what that means. You're a 20-something American pilot. You've been shot down behind enemy lines. You're in a cave in a foreign country where you don't speak the language. The only thing between you and capture is a farmer you just met and his 2 kids. You can't light a fire. Smoke would give you away. You can't leave during daylight. German patrols. You have no radio, no contact with Allied forces, no idea if anyone even knows you're alive. Your entire existence depends on whether a man you've known for a few hours keeps coming back with food. That's the reality Lyon and Downing faced in October 1943. And that's where the real story begins. Let me tell you exactly how they survived, because this wasn't just about hiding. This was about creating a sustainable system for keeping 2 men alive in enemy territory for months. Tullio Meirelli couldn't just walk to the cave every day. That would create a pattern. German patrols would notice a farmer regularly heading into the woods with a basket. So the routine had to be irregular, unpredictable, and involve multiple people, so no single person's movements became suspicious. Enter Silvio and Silvana, Morelli's children. They would carry food to the cave, sometimes separately, sometimes together, sometimes in the morning, sometimes evening. Kids moving through the countryside drew less suspicion than adults. Kids exploring the woods, playing near the stream, wasn't unusual. But think about what that meant for those children. Every time they walked to that cave with bread or vegetables or whatever Morelli could spare, they were risking their lives. If a German patrol stopped them and searched the basket, execution, not just for them, for their father, maybe their whole family. They did it anyway, for 8.5 months. The cave itself, let me paint the picture. It's carved into the tufa rock by centuries of water erosion. The entrance is hidden behind the waterfall. Inside, it's dark, damp, cold. No natural light except what filters through the water during the day. The rock walls weep moisture constantly. In winter, temperatures in central Italy can drop below freezing at night. In summer, at least it's cool, but that constant dampness never stops. The pilots couldn't stand upright in most of it. They slept on whatever bedding Morelli could smuggle to them. Probably straw, blankets, anything to keep them off the wet stone. They had no way to wash properly, no change of clothes, no medical supplies beyond basic first aid. If either of them got sick or injured, there was no doctor, no hospital, no antibiotics, just hope and whatever folk remedies Morelli might know, and they had to stay absolutely silent during daylight hours, because the waterfall masked sound from a distance. But if German soldiers got close to the stream, investigating the water source, checking the area, or just taking a break, any noise would give them away. A cough, a stumble, the clatter of a tin cup. Any sound could mean capture and death. Here's what we know they had. Food brought irregularly by the Morelli family. Water from the stream, which they had to collect carefully at night, making sure no one was around. Basic supplies, probably a knife, maybe a lantern they could only use deep in the cave where light wouldn't leak out through the waterfall. And each other. 2 American pilots stuck in a cave, not knowing if rescue would ever come, not knowing if the Allies were winning or losing, not knowing if anyone even knew they were alive. The only connection to the outside world was Tullio Morelli and his children. Lieutenant Lyon stayed for several months. We don't know exactly how long, but at some point he left. Here's where the story gets interesting. He escaped with help from someone identified only as Lily. We don't know who Lily was. A local partisan? A member of an escape network? Someone from the town? The records don't say. That identity is lost to history. But Lyon made it. He reached Allied lines, he survived the war, and eventually he settled in Hollywood, California. Lieutenant Downing stayed longer, 8.5 months. That's 255 days, 36 weeks. Think about that duration. October 1943 through approximately June 1944. He was in that cave through the entire Italian winter, through Christmas, through the early spring, hiding. What do you do with your mind for 8.5 months in a cave? How do you keep from going crazy? How do you maintain hope when every day is identical and you have no idea if the Allies are advancing or stalled, or if the war has turned against them? Downing found a way, and eventually he too reached Allied lines. The exact details of his escape aren't recorded in the sources we have. But he made it. Hit that bell icon if you want to hear more stories of survival against impossible odds. These are the stories they should teach in schools. Think about what Tullio Maorelli did from his perspective. This wasn't a one-day act of courage. This wasn't helping someone escape and then it's over. This was 255 days of sustained risk. Every morning, he woke up knowing that German soldiers could search his property that day. Every time Silvio or Silvana walked to the cave, he waited, not knowing if they'd come back or if a German patrol would follow them home. Every time he set aside food for the pilots, he was taking food from his own family in wartime conditions when supplies were already scarce. The German command post wasn't miles away. It was nearby. German officers could show up at any time. If they requisitioned his farmhouse for quarters, game over. If they decided to search the area around the stream, game over. If someone in the town informed on him, and there were always informers, people who collaborated to save themselves or their families, game over. And the consequence wasn't arrest, it wasn't prison, it was execution. Probably for him, possibly for his children, potentially for his extended family. The Germans did not play around with civilian resistance. He did it anyway. Now here's something most people don't realize about World War II Italy. The stories we hear are usually about the big battles, Anzio, Monte Cassino, the Gothic Line. But there's this parallel story of thousands of Italian civilians engaged in daily acts of resistance. Not armed resistance, just the quiet, dangerous work of helping Allied personnel survive. A farmer hides a pilot for 8 months. A shopkeeper passes messages. A priest shelters evaders in the church cellar. A teenager guides escapers through the mountains toward Allied lines. Individually, these acts don't change the course of the war. Collectively, they saved thousands of lives. And nobody knows their names. No medals, no monuments. Just decent people doing what they thought was right, despite the risk. Well, most of them don't get recognized. But Tullio Maorelli, his story was about to come back 80 years later, because of a letter. 1946. The war is over. Europe is rebuilding. And in Hollywood, California, First Lieutenant John R. Lyon receives a letter from Italy. It's from Tullio Maorelli in Pitigliano, Grosseto, the farmer who hid him in the cave. The letter has names, addresses, details of the rescue. It's Maorelli reaching out across the ocean to the pilot he saved, making sure Lyon made it home, letting him know that the Maorelli family survived the war, too. Lyon kept that letter, tucked it away with photographs and keepsakes, and there it stayed for decades. Lyon lived his life in California, had a family, daughters Laura and Lisa, eventually passed away, and the letter sat in a box, unread, forgotten. Until about 2024, when one of Lyon's daughters was going through old family items, and she found it. Now, if you're into this kind of historical detective work, I've linked some incredible resources in the description below about World War II escape and evasion networks. Check those out. And if you think this story deserves to be shared, hit that share button. These stories need to reach more people. The daughter didn't just put the letter back. She started asking questions. Who was Tullio Maorelli? Was his family still in Pitigliano? What happened to the cave? And, most important, what happened to Lieutenant Downing, the other pilot her father mentioned being hidden with? Her search led her to an organization called Air Crash Po. Air Crash Po was founded in 2007 by Luca Gabriele Merli, Stefano Daniele Merli, and colleagues. Their mission is to locate World War II aircraft crash sites in Italy, identify the crews, recover artifacts, and, most importantly, connect with families. They do it with metal detectors, archival research, and a sense of duty. As Luca Merli puts it, we do it out of respect for those who lost their lives in the line of duty and for their families. We do it for passion. We do it out of a sense of duty. Since 2007, Air Crash Poe has restored names and stories to over 80 lost aircraft and crews. They've found crash sites that had been forgotten for 70 years. They've identified pilots whose families never knew where they died. And they've created memorials at remote crash sites, so these men are never forgotten. When Laura Lyon reached out to them with the letter, Air Crash Poe researchers Agostino Alberti and Luca Merli went to work. They dove into military archives, unit records from the 71st Fighter Squadron, mission logs from October 21, 1943, after-action reports. They confirmed Lyon's aircraft and Downing's aircraft were both lost that day. They confirmed the mid-air collision. They verified the details in Maiorelli's letter. Then they went local. They searched Pitigliano records. They found the Maiorelli family. They made contact with Tullio's grandchildren, Novello Maiorelli, Rossella, and others. The family still lived in the area. They knew the story. It had been passed down, but they had no idea what happened to the American pilots their grandfather saved. Air Crash Poe connected the families. American researcher Patty Johnson helped coordinate between the United States and Italy, and they started planning something extraordinary: a reunion at the cave, 81 years after the rescue. October 19th, 2024. Laura and Lisa Lyon, John R. Lyon's daughters, travel to Pitigliano. They meet Novello Maiorelli and Rossella, Tullio Maiorelli's grandchildren, two families connected by an act of courage that happened before any of them were born. The reunion had three parts. First, a ceremony at the Pitigliano Town Hall. The mayor, local officials, Air Crash Poe researchers, and both families gathered in the council chamber. Official recognition of what Tullio Maiorelli did. A formal acknowledgement that this story is part of Pitigliano's history. Second, a visit to the Pitigliano Cemetery. The families gathered at Tullio Maiorelli's grave. They laid flowers, they said prayers, and Air Crash Poe installed a terracotta plaque honoring his courage. The plaque makes it official. Tullio Maiorelli saved Allied lives at risk to himself and his family. That's now part of the permanent record. Third, and this is the most emotional part, they went to the cave. Rossella and the other Maiorelli cousins guided Laura and Lisa Lyon through the forest to the site. The cave is still there. Erosion has partially collapsed the upper section where the waterfall used to flow stronger, but the hiding place remains. Now it's covered with vegetation, hidden even more than it was during the war. The families stood where their relatives stood 81 years ago, where the pilots hid, where Silvio and Silvana brought food, where Tullio Maiorelli risked everything. Laura and Lisa described it as a deeply emotional experience marked by gratitude and reflection, because they were standing at the place where their father survived. If Tullio Maiorelli had made a different choice on October 21st, 1943, they wouldn't exist. After the cave visit, the families went to Rossella's farmhouse. They exchanged contact information. They promised to stay in touch, and both families committed to keeping this story alive. There's one more piece to this story. Air Crash Poe is still searching for relatives of Lieutenant Herbert Downing, Jr. They found Lyon's family. They created this reunion. But Downing's descendants haven't been located yet. If anyone watching this has information about Herbert Downing, Jr., 2nd Lieutenant, U.S. Army Air Forces, shot down October 21st, 1943, reach out to Air Crash Poe. There's a family out there that deserves to know what their grandfather survived. The Maiorelli family wants to meet them, just like they met the Lyons. Let's recap what you've learned in the last 30 minutes. On October 21st, 1943, two American P-38 Lightning pilots, First Lieutenant John R. Lyon and Second Lieutenant Herbert Downing, Jr., collided mid-air during a dogfight over central Italy. Both bailed out behind enemy lines near the Tuscan town of Pitigliano. Italian farmer Tullio Miarelli found them. Instead of turning them in to the nearby German command post, he hid them in a cave behind a waterfall. His children, Silvio and Silvana, brought them food for months. Lieutenant Lyon escaped after several months with help from a mysterious helper named Lily. Lieutenant Downing remained hidden for 8.5 months, 255 days, before reaching Allied lines. Both pilots survived the war. Miarelli sent a letter to Lyon in Hollywood in 1946. That letter sat forgotten for nearly 80 years until Lyon's daughter discovered it in 2024. Aircrash Po, an Italian aviation archaeology organization, verified the story and connected the families. In October 2024, the Lyon and Miarelli families met at the cave for an emotional reunion. Here's what this story really means. You started this video probably thinking about World War II as big battles and famous generals. You now understand that the war was also millions of small decisions by ordinary people. Tullio Miarelli wasn't a soldier. He was a farmer with 2 kids. He could have walked away. He didn't. That decision, that single choice to hide 2 strangers, created a legacy that lasted 8 decades and brought 2 families together in 2024. The transformation here isn't just knowing a new historical story, it's understanding that courage isn't always loud. It's not always on the battlefield. Sometimes it's a farmer bringing food to a cave every day for 8 months. Sometimes it's 2 kids walking through occupied territory with a basket. Sometimes it's keeping a secret that could get you killed. And sometimes it's an old letter in a shoebox that brings a forgotten hero back to light. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now. I'm finding more stories like this, the hidden history that shaped our world. Next video, I'm covering another incredible rescue story from World War II that almost nobody knows about. You're not going to believe what happens. Share this video with someone who loves history. Let's make sure Tullio Miarelli, Silvio, Silvana, and the thousands of Italian civilians who saved Allied lives get the recognition they deserve. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.